Welcome to our Bible study. We continue our study of Proverbs chapter 6, verses 16 through 19, which includes 7 things that the Lord hates. But before we do that, I'd like to remind everybody of some of the different resources available. As we're still dealing with the COVID situation, not everybody can come out and be with us physically. And if do have to worship at home, there are many options available. Of course, many congregations stream their services on Facebook Live. Many of them do it on YouTube or some other venue or put it on their website. But some other resources which are available are the In Search of the Lord's Way program with Phil Sanders. It's on Sunday at 7:30. It's on DirecTV channel 47, Dish TV channel 239, Spectrum Cable channel 3. This program is out of Edmond, Oklahoma. It's always an excellent program. There's always good singing in the program. Brother Sanders does an excellent job preaching. In addition to these resources, there's the Gospel Broadcasting Network and World Video Bible School, which have a tremendous amount of material for you to watch. Most of this material is free, and if it's not free, it's there for a minimal cost. And so we do have virtual resources available for those who are unable to be out. But even if you are able to be out and to be about, obviously these are still good resources that can be used to help you grow closer to God. As we introduce our lesson here in Proverbs chapter 6, it says you can learn quite a bit about someone by learning what he or she likes or dislikes. You talk to a person for a while and then maybe they just focus on money. Maybe they focus on sports. Maybe they focus on the family. Maybe they focus on themselves. Talk about how great they are, or maybe they complain, and you find out pretty much what a person likes and what he or she dislikes. And so when we think of God, we think about the things that God likes or dislikes. We understand the fact that there are certain things that are always right to do that God likes us to do. We go to the New Testament, we look at the idea to love one another, to love God with heart, soul, and mind, to love our neighbor as ourselves. It's never wrong to do that. It's never wrong to practice the golden rule, Matthew chapter 7 and verse 12. Basically, treat people the way you want to be treated. But on the negative side of that, sometimes people are unaware of the fact that God hates certain things. And I know sometimes we make the distinction between God hating the individual and hating the sin, even though there are one or two passages in the Old Testament where it specifically says the Lord hates the person, which is a sort of a difficult thing to deal with. But the bottom line is that sin destroys. Sin destroys relationships, and when we understand that, then we're going to understand the hatred that God has for these things. I don't care what sin we're talking about, somehow it's going to destroy either a relationship with another human being, or, of course, more importantly, it's going to destroy a relationship with God. And here are 7 things specifically that God hates. And, of course, these are things that from the beginning of time, people practice them, and yet God hates them. First of all, the proud look. We looked at that 2 weeks ago. And the proud look is the person who basically doesn't need God in the picture. This is the person who maybe has all the answers, the person who looks down upon others, and the person who is the proud has no room for God in his life. Psalm chapter 10 and verse 4 tell us that. And of course, we know in the New Testament that many of the Pharisees were proud. They were religious people, considered themselves righteous, but they actually were self-righteous, and they didn't really need God in their life. They thought they, were just so pleasing to God that He just sort of had to accept them as they are. And we look at the story of the publican and the Pharisees. We looked at this sin, the fact that this publican was a sinner, but realized he was, and asked for mercy from God. The Pharisee was a sinner and didn't realize it, and basically bragged to God how great he was. So pride is that which keeps us away from God. It's that which says I don't really need God in my life, and everything great that I've done or have is all because of me. And obviously this is a sin to God. God hates this. The lying tongue, we looked at last week, the fact that God wants his people to be a people of honesty, a people of integrity. And I know in a world where lies seem to be abundant, no matter where you go, and especially with media being so available, people start arguing over who's telling the truth, or maybe even who's telling the truth the most, as if there's degrees of truth when it comes to honesty. But God hates the lying tongue. Tonight we're going to look at this hands that shed innocent blood, and of course then the rest of the passage, a heart that devises wicked plans, feet that are swift in running to evil, a false witness who speaks lies, and one who sows discord among brethren. When we think about hatred or rather hands that shed innocent blood, we think about the very point behind that, and that is the sanctity of human life. I realize we live in a culture with two polarizations, two extreme views concerning life. Christians believe that life begins in the womb, begins at conception, that our life is given to us by God, and our life is sacred. It's the sanctity of human life. Where many people think that there's no difference between a human being and a dog or a cat or some other animal, maybe even a fly, and they see no distinction between the human and the animal world. In Genesis chapter 1 and verse 26, at the first chapter talking about the creation of the world, God said, "Let us make man in our image, according to our likeness. Let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, over the birds of the air, and over the cattle, over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps on the earth." So God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him. Male and female, he created them. God doesn't specifically tell us what it means to be created in his image, but if we think about the characteristics of God, obviously, if we're created in the image of God, we should reflect what he loves and what he doesn't like. We should reflect what he loves. We should hate what he hates, love what he loves. Also, that we are responsible human beings. We can make choices in life. We can choose to either do right or to do that which is wrong. And also, we have the ability to be benevolent, kind human beings. So there are many factors involved when we talk about being created in God's image. But notice that when we think about the being created in the image of God, that God says this is man was created, and he said everything was good. He doesn't say that about the rest of the created world. I think it's significant that later on, following the flood, that as Moses, or rather Noah, gets off the ark, of course the sacrifice is made, and God makes a covenant. And in that covenant, he says, "Whoever sheds man's blood, by man his blood shall be shed. For in the image of God he made man." So it's ironic that God authorized capital punishment to stop people from killing others. In other words, if I willfully take the life of another human being, if I murder another individual, then my life also is to be taken from me. The reason being because that person from whom I took life was made in God's image. So when we look at some of the laws of the Bible, we go behind these laws and understand the fact that as human beings, we're sacred. We're created in God's image. There are many passages in the Old Testament which talk about the shedding of innocent blood. Manasseh is a classic one. Manasseh shed very much innocent blood till he had filled Jerusalem from one end to another, besides his sin by which he made Judah sin in doing evil in the sight of the Lord. I don't know what all was involved in Manasseh's shedding of innocent blood. Most of the kings who were wicked probably did so just simply for power, for greed, to take land, money from people, just to show the power they had. The Bible says Manasseh actually caused his sons to pass through the fire, which was the practice of infant sacrifice to the gods. And so we see that even this person who should have been a reflection of God, even though he was a king, he still was a descendant of David and should have reflected God's will in the rule that he had, actually offered his sons to the god Molech. We can look in the book of the 94th Psalm, verses 20 and 21. "Shall the throne of iniquity, which devises evil by law, have fellowship with you? They gather together against the life of the righteous and condemn innocent blood." Here he's talking about different rulers, and we see this throughout the Old Testament. I've been preaching a series of lessons on Sunday night from the so-called minor prophets. And these prophets deal with this with so-called theory of social justice, that basically the leadership of Israel and Judah for so many years, hundreds of years, they were corrupt, they were powerful, they abused those who were the most innocent, those who could defend themselves the least in culture and society. They stole land from the orphans, from the widows. They became wealthy not through hard work and being an industrious people. They became wealthy through sin and through power, and they condemned innocent blood. We think of the story of Ahab and Naboth's vineyard, how Ahab wanted to buy that vineyard from Naboth, and Naboth refused, saying it's in my family. I can't, sell my family land. And of course, Jezebel, Ahab's wife, tells him just have somebody tell a lie about Ahab or Naboth and have him killed. Of course, Ahab did it just like that. And that happens so many times in the Old Testament. It's happened so many times in the history of humanity. The fact that people, especially rulers and have the power, will condemn innocent blood. Joel chapter 3, verse 19, "Egypt shall be a desolation, and Edom a desolate wilderness because of violence against the people of Judah, for they have shed innocent blood in their land." Now, as we go through the minor prophets, as I've emphasized in my Sunday night lessons, sometimes Judah and sometimes Israel are condemned for their sins, but many times God condemns the nations around them. It's interesting that even though God raises up the Babylonians, or rather the Assyrians, to conquer Israel, the northern kingdom, God in turn raises up the Babylonians to take care of the Assyrians because of the Assyrians' wickedness. Just as God raises up the Babylonians then to conquer Judah, the southern kingdom, he raises up the Persians to conquer the Babylonians because of the Babylonians' wickedness. And here he's going to pass judgment on Egypt and Edom because of their violence against the nation of Judah. And again, because they had shed innocent blood in their land. And I believe there's maybe 15 or 20 passages like this in the Old Testament where the shedding of innocent blood is mentioned. And it's something that God hates, whether an individual practices this or whether even corporately as a nation, that these nations were going to be punished. In 1 Samuel chapter 19, Jonathan is pleading with Saul, his father. Saul wants to kill David, who has done nothing wrong, who is innocent. Jonathan spoke well of David to Saul, his father, and said to him, "Let not the king sin against his servant, against David, because he has not sinned against you. His works have been very good toward you. He took his life in his hands and killed the Philistine," talking about Goliath, "and the Lord brought about a great deliverance for all Israel. You saw it and rejoiced. Why then will you sin against innocent blood to kill David without a cause?" And so, as we've looked at these passages, and I said there's probably close to 20 passages in the Old Testament which condemn the taking of innocent blood, the question might be asked, why do people shed innocent blood? I think I would hope most human beings, and especially most Christians, would have this abhorrence. Why would those who are innocent, many times those who are maybe the least able to defend themselves, why would someone try to kill them? Sometimes it's ignorance. They don't know any better. We see this even practiced in various world religions where people in the name of their god or deity think they're doing the right thing by killing innocent people, and they're very sincere in what they are doing. Anger. Sometimes in fits of anger, people will just simply murder another person, not really thinking about the consequences of what they're doing. Greed is a very common motive, at least it was in the Old Testament, and I think we see it throughout historically. How many times do people kill innocent people simply for money, for greed, and we find out that eventually their sin will find them out? And even selfishness, the idea that I want something that belongs to somebody else, I don't value the life of the other person. There might be other reasons why people shed innocent blood. We think about the topic of abortion, and of course, it's a very heated topic. And again, there are polar opposites at times when we consider this topic. On the one hand, someone says, "Well, this is the woman's body, the woman's choice." On the other hand, people say, that's not just the woman's body; that's a human being inside that body. And there seems to be the debate going back and forth. But when we think about abortion, there's been more than 40 million abortions in the United States since 1973. And I think it's significant, and this is from the Guttmacher Institute, basically Planned Parenthood. This is their statistics. About 93% of abortions, women have cited social reasons, not the mother's health or rape or incest as a motivation for abortion. And I'm not saying it's still right. I understand there's a difficult situation when an individual is raped and violence is brought upon that individual, or there's incest involved, or even the health of the mother. And at times, a decision has to be made, a moral decision between maybe saving one life or the other. And that's not the same as someone simply having an abortion because they think they don't want a child at this time, or they think that maybe they cannot afford to raise this individual. That unborn human being is simply turned into something as sort of a problem that's going to come into that person's life. We see, and it continue to as science continues to increase knowledge, a baby's heart begins to beat around 22 days from conception. And even with modern medicine, that so many babies who are born now, even weeks, months ahead of time before their normal delivery time, are able to survive outside the mother's womb. So obviously, the practice of abortion is something which we need to recognize as violating God's will. Uh, this is not to say we should not have compassion on those who need or are trying to face an abortion. The fact that the helping of such individuals with perhaps an adoption, or maybe talking them through this, and even understanding the consequences. There can be, mental health consequences, guilt consequences of those who have had abortions, and of course that fact's never brought up by those who support abortion. Again, the sanctity of human life. God said, "Let us make man in our own image, according to our likeness." As we mentioned, abortion is one of these issues. And not only is abortion an issue which is very common in our culture, but as we go to the Old Testament, we find there are various laws that reflect the sanctity of human life, in that not all murder or killing is murder, the shedding of innocent blood. In Exodus chapter 20 and verse 13, the King James says, thou shalt not kill. A better translation would be that, thou shalt not murder. As we're thinking about it, all killing is not necessarily murder. Okay, there are things that are not prohibited by this commandment that is found in the Ten Commandments. First of all, so-called accidental homicide. Numbers 35, there's an interesting law in the Old Testament where that if you accidentally killed somebody, maybe you were swinging an axe and you didn't realize somebody was behind you, or accidentally, killed someone in some other fashion, that basically you were to be brought before the town council, and if they decided it was an accident, then you were to flee to a city of refuge. And of course, the closest relative was allowed to try to avenge that death. As long as you stayed inside that city, you were okay. But if you went outside that city, that relative had a right to take your life until the death of the high priest. But again, accidental homicide, as we say manslaughter, is not the same as murder. Self-defense. Exodus chapter 22 and verse 2 says if a person is found breaking in at night, that you're allowed to defend yourself. You're allowed to take the life of that individual if necessary. We read about so-called police action. In Exodus chapter 32, as Moses comes down from the mount after receiving the Ten Commandments, meeting with God and so forth, basically there's a party going on down below. There's fornication being committed. And I believe in verse 26 or 27, Moses calls out, he says, everybody who's on God's side, get your sword and, and kill the people who are involved in this. So basically, these people were authorized. They were deputized, we might say, to kill those who were involved in this action. In 1 Peter, the second chapter, under the new covenant, God gives civil government the right to act and to exist. Therefore, submit yourselves to every ordinance of man for the Lord's sake, whether the king is supreme, or to governors as to those who are sent by him for the punishment of evildoers and for the praise of those who do good. God allows and authorizes the actions of police forces. And obviously, as we look at this, no police force is perfect, no government's perfect, no Christian's perfect. But the point being, it's authorized by God. And even capital punishment. As we look at in the Old Testament, that capital punishment was a sin that the society was to bring about. Could be brought about because of idolatry, murder, kidnapping, and various other sins. And God gives civil government this right in the New Testament. Romans chapter 13 and verse 4, the sword is not brought in vain. Now, we think about capital punishment. I don't think the New Testament demands that we argue or fight for capital punishment, but there's nothing wrong with a government having capital punishment. It's authorized by God. And we need to understand that from the Bible, going clear back to Genesis chapter 9. The reason for capital punishment, among other reasons, is because of the sanctity, the sacredness of human life. And so, what is prohibited? We looked at some things were not prohibited as far as the sanctity of life and killing. Obviously, euthanasia. Again, going back to the sanctity of life, and we're not talking about taking care of people who with comfort as they near the end of their life. We're talking about the willful taking of a life, a person who has life ahead, and they choose, and maybe the government decides to step in and choose to take the life of that person. That's obviously the taking of an innocent life. Abortion, as already mentioned, Psalm 119 or 139, 13 through 16. David talks about the unborn human being and a human body being woven together just as someone might weave a rug on a loom, and how God creates and brings this life together, the wonders of that human body. And even hatred. I think it's interesting as Christians, we might say, well, I've never, hated, I've never killed anybody, I've never murdered anybody. But Christ says, as Christians, we're called to a higher level, that we can have hatred so bad that it's almost the equivalent of killing somebody. As Jesus speaks, and you've heard, thou shalt not kill. But I say, whoever's, angry with his brother without a cause is in danger of the judgment. So as Christians, we're reminded of having the right attitude towards those around us. And that hatred, at times in the Bible, can be equated with murder, depending how bad that hatred might be. So obviously, God hates hands that shed innocent blood. And we need to go back one step further again before that verse and look at the very principle. The reason he hates it, among other things, is that we are created in the image of God. Human beings are special. We're not like the animal kingdom around us. And so we do need to respect human life. And as we have looked at these, we have covered the third one of the 7 things that God hates in Proverbs chapter 6, that being hands that shed innocent blood. And as we'll notice, the next 2 or 3 of these things that God hates really tie in at times to hands that shed innocent blood. A heart that devises wicked plans could be a wicked plan to shed innocent blood. Feet that are swift and running to evil, the same thing, to shed innocent blood. And a false witness who speaks lies, maybe in order to shed innocent blood. Thank you for being with us in our Bible study.